Joining me now to discuss this a bit further is Mr. Qingdo Xu. He's a senior fellow at Pangol Institution who comes to you live out of the Chinese capital of Beijing. Right next to him, we will have the pleasure of hosting Mr. Emmanuel Pastryk. He is the head of Washington, D.C. think tank Asia Institute out of Seoul, South Korea. Gentlemen, it's good to have you with us. I'm going to begin with Mr. Xu in Beijing to come in and give us his view on the latest development. Mr. Xu, please.
Well, I think obviously this is I would say, surprising attack on U.S. terms so-called press freedom here, because these websites, in particular Press TV, gives people the opinions, the ideas, or the perceptions from the Iranian side story. If you want to be objective, if you want to be better informed, of course, you would love to be open to different perceptions, different ideas. And now, with the sites being closed, obviously, for a lot of people, there's difficult to access to this website, to these informations. So this is an attack on press freedom. And interestingly, the reasons given by the United States is about disinformation or efforts or interruption with the U.S. democratic process, etc. I think this reflects upon this domestic problem with the United States. We heard a lot, so much disinformation campaign by Trump and his supporters, with this QAnon conspiracy theory and this election interference basically against each other between the Democrats and the Republicans. This is basically a domestic problem. Now they are pointing finger at the Iranians and other websites. This is really unfair, to say the least. And most importantly, I think they are somehow weaponizing the internet domain names. They are abusing this monopoly position or this freedom to attack another country. Could be politically, this is a response to the election results of the Iranian presidential election. Mr. Raisi, they say this is hardliner, toward the U.S. They are not happy with that. But most importantly, this is a serious warning to other countries. I mean, if the U.S. are not happy with your country or with your website, they could close it randomly, basically at will. So I think this is a reminder for a lot of other countries. They need to do something probably to protect themselves, to ward off a potential attack on their press.
Okay, let's go to Seoul and bring in Mr. Emmanuel Pastryk to comment on this. Mr. Pastryk, we're with you, please.
I think from an American perspective, as an American, it's best to see this not as a particular attack on Iran or on a foreign news agency, although obviously it is part of this campaign, this building up for some sort of military action against Iran, which is taking place. However, the primary issue is the systematic effort to cut off access to reliable scientific information of the American public. Starting within the United States, numerous previously very useful websites such as Counter are no longer allowed to provide any meaningful political critique, and Press TV has become one of the few places out there that America.
Well, I believe we do not have a stable connection with Mr. Pastryk. My colleagues are trying to improve that connection. If they can, you please do in the control room. We don't have a good connection with Mr. Pastryk. See if we can improve that. I'm going to get back to Beijing now to see Mr. Xu once again. Hopefully his connection is better than our other guests. Mr. Xu, of course, one of the reasons, and it's very interesting if I tell you, that has been quoted as being why these websites are targeted, in particular Press TV, is disinformation. Now, disinformation not necessarily pertaining to what Press TV airs or puts on its website. It seems that we just lost both our guests. I'm just going to fill you in on the latest information regarding what has happened and see if my colleagues can try to get our guests back on air. Do we have any one of our guests? If we do, Mr. Pastrak, do we have you? Mr. Xu?
Repeat the question. I just disconnected for a while.
Okay, it's good to have you back, Mr. Xu. It's interesting, like I was saying, it's interesting that one of the reasons that has been quoted as being behind this act by the U.S. is that these websites disinform. So far as you're concerned, what is it that they are talking about here? You know, the fact that, as far as I was concerned, it's just that these websites go places, go to locations in the world that they are less reported from, or talk about aspects of world issues that are less talked about. How is it disinformation and therefore deserve this punishment or deserve this blocking?
Well, I partly agree with the previous speaker that Press TV, websites like Press TV, provides this vital and important information from the perception of the Iranians, also variety of opinions. If you look at the U.S. press, the media coverage about Iran, obviously, it's most of the time it's really about you can see the attitudes. You can almost describe the attitudes with hostility, or with most of the negative coverage about Iran. Then that is not balanced. I think for any public, if they want to have a objective understanding or assessment of the situation of Iran and the relationship between Iran and the United States, you do look at both sides of the coin, both sides of the story, right? The U.S. attitudes and the Iranian understanding. And then you have a much better understanding of the situation. Now the U.S. somehow is basically saying that, I want to make public, the American public, to access only one-sided information about Iran. Basically, it's like the government efforts to demonize Iran, to support the policy, or to garner support from the public about the Iranian policy over there. So this is obviously detrimental to the interests of the American public. Of course, it's detrimental to the Iranian interests, because for the Iranian people, they want to gain a better understanding by other peoples, by countries in China, Russia, the United States, or other regional powers. So I think better communication is always good for the peace, stability, for the entire world, for relationship between Iran and the United States. But unfortunately, the U.S., under this excuse of disinformation efforts or election eruption over there, this is, to say the least, is unfair. And as I would say, this is the attempt by the Biden regime, basically, as an attack on Iran, on the Iran press here.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Pastrak, what do you think about the fact, that one of the reasons as why this act has been committed is the fact that these channels have been disinforming people, or they're accused of alleged disinformation? To what extent are you surprised at all? Do you go along with that, or how do you think this can be justified?
Well, in the current environment in the United States, basically there's this whole series of new myths which have been created, and anybody, American or foreign, who advocates or presents in a scientific matter a different opinion will be considered to be engaged in misinformation. Also, it's critical for us to understand that when we say that this website, say Press TV, was taken down by the United States government, that this term government is not really all that accurate. That FBI, various intelligence agencies, and part of the Department of Defense have been privatized in such a manner that many of these activities are undertaken by private Israeli consulting firms, by Facebook, Amazon, and other small multinational corporations who pretend to be the United States, but in fact are engaged in these activities for their own particular corporate profit agendas.
And it doesn't seem that the U.S. is doing anything really to clear its name, from what is, if that's the case, it doesn't really do anything meaningful to clear its name from that.
So if I could just say one word about that, the Biden administration itself is essentially made up of a group of people who belong to a group of four equity and consulting firms, for-profit. And so it is essentially a for-profit corporation, the entire administration, which works closely with BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, and a variety of international high equity and investment firms. So it is not really a government at all.
Okay. Well, I guess we're going to have to leave it here, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you very much, both of you. Guests, Mr. Jingdo Xu, Senior Fellow with Pangol Institution out of Beijing. I also hosted Mr. Emmanuel Pastrak, head with Washington, D.C. think tank, Asia Institute out of Seoul, South Korea. I really appreciate your being with us, gentlemen. You have a very good time.